just do the prep, practice your questions. I always suggest like role play with a friend, a parent, a sibling, like just print a list of questions, give it to them, and then try to answer it and time yourself. Practice, 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 and then you'll just keep getting better at it. If you come across like curious, like you said, you'll get more information. If you add like something personal, like you said, it could actually help you in the end. When do you ask about salary and how do you ask that? And this one is a hot topic.
Don't be afraid to walk away from something that's financially not going to be in your best interest. Again, this is a two-way experience. You have to make the best choice for you too. I will start with one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make all the time. People go down a rabbit hole of their personal lives where they want to tell me all about their childhoods. One of the things my dad told me when he was prepping me for like one of my very first interviews is be okay with the silence.
Hi, everyone. It's Kailyn with KBex Global, and we're here for another podcast show. This one's really, really interesting. Everyone could utilize this information we're going to discuss today because I won't say everyone, but 99.9% of people out there are interviewing, have looked for a job before, have struggled with interview questions, or have left an interview thinking, oh gosh, I should have answered that differently. What are they looking for? So we've all been there, myself and Kiandria today, who is our podcast guest. She has extensive experience in talent acquisition, and I'll let her introduce herself because she knows herself better than I do. And those are kind of the topics from a high level we'll be discussing today with her. So yeah, without further ado, would you like to do a little brief intro of yourself?
Yes, of course. Well, I'm so excited to be on today. Again, Kiandria, I'm a talent acquisition manager currently for a SaaS-based tech company. So I've been in talent acquisition for a few years now, but I've also done recruiting for side businesses of myself, even back in my education days. I have an education background. I was an assistant director and did some hiring and recruiting and all those things there. So seen it in a lot of different spaces in different ways. So really excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, that's great. You have a lot of different point of views that not every recruiter has. Well, we will start with just to give another kind of overview, but interview preparation, interview questions to maybe ask always in certain situations, or really the ones that you want to maybe stay away from, even maybe at certain stages and whatnot. And then we'll go through a list of common questions that all of you have probably experienced in an interview, or at least the majority of them, and how to go about answering those. So we'll start with the interview prep. Yes. And very open-ended question here. How do you prep for an interview in general?
Oh, goodness. I think it's always so funny to me because I think because I do so many interviews, I'm like, oh, people should already know this. But then I realize that's not the case. But no, I think a couple of big things really come to mind for me. The number one thing is do your research, please. So whether that is researching the company, make sure you know the job you're applying for. I've had candidates in the past that have logged on and they're like, what's this company again? What do you guys do? I don't remember which one this is. So just simply making sure that you remember the job that you've applied for. I know some people like keep a running list so that they know when they applied, who's the contact person. So that would be the first thing. Being able to speak to your resume. These sound like very simple things, but I have had candidates in the past that have been stumbling through where they're like, that's on my resume. I'm like, yep, it's right here. So making sure that you've taken a look through your resume. I know a lot of people use ChatGPT, which I highly recommend. Use technology in your favor, but making sure that you can really, really speak to some of those things that you're listing. Maybe not put things on there that you're not too comfortable with talking about. I would say is probably really important. And another thing too, kind of like really, really general when I think about people preparing for an interview is like having a couple of like go-to examples. Like I know we've all had projects that we've worked on where we are doing everything. It's collaborating. You're having to show leadership. You're having to problem solve. So having like a couple of very versatile examples that you can maybe use if someone's asking you about strengths or problem solving or dealing with difficult people, just so that way you don't have to like kind of sit and think about like, I don't know, and really knowing that example inside and out. So those are like my go-to. Those are the biggest three things that I think will really, really help someone feel a little bit more confident when they're going in.
I agree with all of those. Really good tips on a general prep. And the first one you mentioned is remembering where you applied to, all that stuff. So I know you said maybe people have kept lists. Any suggestions there? Like, is it like an Excel spreadsheet? Like, should they be writing down or logging like every application they've done, or at least when someone's called back? Like, what's a good way to keep that organized? Because some people are applying to like 60 a day. Like, I've heard
Yeah.
crazy numbers. But yeah, how do you keep that organized?
Yeah. I mean, I know some people, they have like a separate folder in their email inbox where once you get that, thank you for applying, you drop it over there. So that way, if you need to go searching through to figure it out, I think that's really good. I mean, it depends on the person. Different people have different, I'm not the most organized person. My mom is, she's the Excel guru. I'm like, I'll just throw it on a Word document. But maybe even if it's like companies or roles that you're really, really excited about, I probably would take an extra step to make sure that you've really got that information saved. Maybe even just in a Word document, like dropping just the links, like from the website, the link to the role, and like maybe putting in parentheses a little note to yourself. So that way, if that recruiter reaches out to you, but once I would say once you're in conversation with the company and you're in conversation with the recruiter and the hiring managers, definitely wanted to have a little bit more of a more detailed running record, because the worst thing is to have someone reaching out to you and you're now getting things mixed up and confused. So once you're more engaged in the process, I would definitely say have a little bit more of a detailed list of some notes of contacts that you've gotten, your notes, any of those types of things, whether it's a spreadsheet, a Word document, even the notes app on your phone. I mean, whatever works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep it somewhere.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, once you're in conversations and like that notes section, I always suggest like add in information from that call. Cause I've noticed, at least on my end, they'll ask questions, I'll answer them, and then they go to the hiring manager and they're asking the same questions. It's like, you don't want to be asking the same questions. You want to be able to list out all these opportunities that you have and really gauge which ones are you interested in and why, and what information you have. And then you can utilize that interview time for different questions. And just a quick stat on interview prep and being prepared for that interview. It's 42% of people who don't get a call back or like move to the next round is because of their lack of prep. So it's almost half of candidates that aren't moving to that next stage because the hiring manager or recruiter realized that they didn't prep at all for that interview or conversation.
That's crazy.
Higher than I expected, but
that is crazy. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's what I found.
From a recruiter standpoint, I kind of have to agree with that stat. If I think back to, I've probably done hundreds of thousands of screenings at this point, and that's probably not off. That's probably pretty accurate.
I was surprised at 42%, but then I'm thinking, well, what are the other reasons? I'm like, well, that one is kind of like the most common one. And I feel like it's such a fast write-off too, because I feel like that question is so early in the interview process or in the interview, hey, what's your name? Tell me about yourself. What do you know about this opportunity? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I hope you could tell me more. I've heard that a lot of times, and I can see in the candidate's eyes that they lied. Like, this is such a strategic question. What do you think? Have you seen that in an interview when they flip it on to the hiring manager or recruiter? I was hoping you could tell me more after the first screening.
Yeah, I have had that happen. And I think there's a balance to it, right? Like, of course, like nobody's going to know every little thing about a company.
Yeah.
But of course, having like a general understanding and a general concept of what they do. Like, for example, like currently I'm at an education company. So simply just knowing, oh, you all work with kids and with schools. That's pretty basic. That's on our website. It's plastered everywhere, all those things like that. Or if it's a construction company, or just having a little bit of a general idea of like what they do at least. And again, know the position you're applying for. Because I mean, especially people that are transitioning from different types of industries. So someone that may have a sales background, they may be trying to shift into something else. So if you're applying for a sales role or maybe something else, so that when you're talking to them, you're talking about the right thing.
Out of the prep that you mentioned, what's the most common step, I guess, rather, that candidates that you notice are skipping?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say something that I think people skip a little bit is having some solid examples. And I know that that's kind of like daunting of like, well, I don't know what they're going to ask me. I don't know what they're going to want to know. I don't want to answer anything wrong. And that's kind of like I had mentioned before, of having those couple of key examples or those key projects that you can multi-purpose. And having a few and having a handful. I've seen sometimes where candidates maybe use the exact same example for every single interview, which
that's a good point.
Is okay to some extent. But if we have a hiring team and there's multiple stages, they probably want to hear a different example. So having a couple of examples, and something really interesting, and we can definitely talk about this more. I recommend to people is having a spreadsheet of your experiences, your key responsibilities you've had in your roles. And if you maybe take on a new project or do something different or do something big or have an accomplishment, write it down. It's crazy, like trying to think back and remember on different types of projects, because you just kind of, when you start going through the motions of work and just doing the things and trying to check things off your list, you're really not thinking about it a whole lot. But as you're going on, like every couple of months, like take a minute, brain dump a little bit of some big accomplishments that you've had, some big, I think they say like some big rocks that you moved over the course of the few months. And that'll help so, so much when you're getting ready to prepare for that interview, because you're not going to rely on the exact same examples all the time. Again, it's good to have a couple of key examples, but having that running list for yourself is going to make it so much easier for your brain.
Yeah, you made a good point, because especially when you've been doing something for so long, or you haven't interviewed in a while, and you've been doing the same thing every day, and then someone asks you to like go step by step in what you do, it's just automated. It's just muscle memory now. It's like, now I got to talk about, I guess happened to me before, and I'm in this field, and people ask me the interview question. When you put yourself in the positions, like, how do I explain what I am doing every day? Because it's just
Yeah.
what I do. You don't think of the like little nuanced things that could really set you apart as a candidate
Yeah.
in interview. So like you said, like listing it out and putting exactly what you did. What was the outcome? Because when it becomes a daily part of your life, it's just so, I don't want to say mundane, but it's just
A little bit.
part of your life. It's like, yeah, how do you clean the dishes? What step by step is like, I don't know, I just clean the dishes. It's kind of like your job. I don't know, I just recruit, but you're actually a
Get the
really
people
good
in.
recruiter. Yeah, but you got to break it down and know what you're doing and know why you're doing it. So if you can't talk about that, it's complete miscommunication and opportunity lost.
Yeah.
It's a
Exactly.
great tip. I know you mentioned, go on the website, at least know the basics of what the company does for sure. Is there anything else beyond that they should know? I've heard people say like, oh, you opened on this year. Here's your values. Here's your mission statement. What do you think? Is there any other any specific information about a company that they should know besides like the job they're interviewing for and the company, what they do?
Ooh, this is a good one. So I would say from a recruiting standpoint, and even like in my role currently, I know that we did some work on our employee value proposition. I was about to use the acronym EVP, but our employee value proposition, and putting a lot of work into our careers page to highlight some really unique things about our company and our organization, all those things like that. So taking a look at that careers page, I'm sure somewhere on there they have some different types of initiatives, or maybe that they're really big into community service, or maybe they have some different community partnerships. Sometimes even on their LinkedIn, like if you just kind of scroll through a little bit on some of their LinkedIn postings that they have, you'll be able to learn a little bit more about the culture and the environment. And so that could be something that you can reference if that's something that resonates and connects with you. And it even shows your excitement about the opportunity of like, hey, I saw that you guys posted you're partnering with this food bank in the local areas. This is something that I've done previously. I love that you all have this carved out. Or maybe on their careers page, they talk about having designated time for employees to utilize community service hours. So whatever it may be that kind of stands out to you, that may be a little bit more unique. But yes, those are some things that I think are kind of cool. When I love when I hear people highlight that. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That.
It kind of makes the candidate like more human. We're like, oh,
Yeah.
and you can see what they like. Like you can see out of all the things that company posted, like what interested them the most. Was it the community service? Was it like this investment that the company just got? It really shows the candidate's personality, and not that there's like one personality go with the other, but it just kind of like it builds rapport rather too. You did the research, you were interested in what you found. So if the candidate's excited about talking to you in the company, it makes the other person excited. Like people match energies. And I always suggest like you want that kind of energy.
And it's really interesting too, because I think, candidates, one thing that I always tell candidates is that interviewing is definitely, it's a two-way experience. Just as much as that company is trying to learn about you and they want to know those things, it's your job to kind of learn those things too for yourself.
We always love when our job is easier too. It's like, like that was a refreshing call. I feel like that covers a lot of interview prep. Let's jump into some interview questions to ask and not to ask. So I'm going to start you off with the open-ended one. What interview questions that you should like definitely ask if there are any? And then obviously the opposite, never ask these questions if there are any.
Yes. Oh, I love this. I love this so much. So one of my biggest encouragements is really kind of knowing the difference, which I'll kind of talk a little bit about it, between questions for a recruiter versus the hiring manager. So one thing to always keep in mind, recruiters are typically recruiting for multiple positions all over the place. We don't necessarily know every little tiny detail. I try to know as much as I can. But really for that recruiter, I really encourage having questions that are going to help you understand about the culture, help you understand about the process, understand, maybe some of those high level aspects of the role. So maybe even what is one unique thing about the culture here that really gets you excited? To continue the work that you're doing. Maybe even like what are some of the big goals that you think that the hiring manager might have, or even highlighting what are some unique characteristics or some unique experiences that the hiring manager may be looking for. Typically as recruiters, we do intake meetings. So I can speak very much high level to a position, and I know some of those key interpersonal skills and tactical skills that they're looking for. So I can share a little bit about that. If you want to know, what does a day-to-day look like? Probably can't speak too much to that. I might can give you a little bit. One of the questions I would say as a recruiter, from a recruiting standpoint, that is probably not going to be as insightful as people think, and this might not be a popular opinion, I'm going to say that, is asking a recruiter what they like the most about working here. More than likely, they're going to probably give you a recycled answer that they have probably said 12,000 times. And there's a possibility on that day they may not be feeling that way because they've had team screenings, but they want to give you a positive experience. Maybe having some more specific questions. Maybe what are some resources that you all have for employee engagement? What are some things that you all have done as an organization based on feedback that you've gotten from those employee surveys? Asking something around how do you all support your leadership to continue to develop for them to be good leaders. Typically, recruiters are on HR teams and talent teams where they're working on those professional development things. So they're going to probably be able to tell you a little bit around what are some of the company core goals that you all have? What are some of those more broad, general organizational things is really probably where that recruiter can speak a little bit more. What are some of the big goals that the company has this year? How are you all tracking towards that? I really encourage those more company specific questions, process, and then more on the hiring manager side, that's where you can get much more into those specific questions. So wanting to know a little bit more about the technology stack that they may have. What are some challenges or obstacles that you're really hoping that this position is going to solve? That gives you a perspective of kind of where they are, the current state, and even from a candidate perspective, because again, this is a two-way street here. I think people a lot of times want to understand about someone's leadership style. And instead of just asking, how would you describe your leadership style? Asking maybe, how do you provide feedback to your team? How do you communicate that? Because that'll give you a little bit of insights of how they communicate, or even asking a question around what is something exciting about your leadership or your team that really would make somebody want to come and work with you? What is something that you guys are doing, something that you bring uniquely as a leader of this team and this department? That kind of flips it a little bit, and it'll probably stump them for a second where they're going to be like, job security right now in this current job market and job state, being able to speak to it a little bit of how they see this role impacting for the next 6 months, 12 months, or 2-3 years. So those are a couple of things.
I love all those questions because they're open-ended, they're super insightful. And like you mentioned, at the recruiter level, you can really understand how the culture is at the organizational level. What is the company doing? Where are they headed? Where are they coming from? Ask those questions are good questions, I think. It gets me thinking too. What do I expect from this role in 90 days?
And honestly, in some ways, it almost kind of foreshadows for you a little bit what your onboarding experience might be like. It may not be the most structured. And if they say like, we've got some big goals for this position, like I need them to do this within this amount of time. And now you can ask yourself, like, is it going to be realistic for me to succeed in this position? And maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's more of like, am I equipped for it? I've had candidates that have said, you know what, now that I've learned a little bit about this, I don't think that I'm the best fit. And that's okay, because again, it's a two-way street. It's a two-way experience. I would hate to see somebody taking a position just to take it, and then they get into it, they're miserable, they're drowning, they're struggling, all the things.
Kind of caveating on the questions, is there a right time? I know you mentioned certain questions for the recruiter, certain questions for the hiring manager, because I've seen a lot of candidates ask questions at different parts of the interview. Now, should they save all their questions to the end? do you like, and this might be different with the recruiter versus hiring manager, maybe it depends on the hiring manager. Should they save their questions to the end? Should they ask the questions as they come up throughout the interview?
From my perspective, I think this really just depends. I try as much as I can when I have newer hiring managers to encourage them to make it as conversational as possible. I'll say from a recruiter standpoint, and I'm gonna speak for me right here. I try to pause. So I may ask a couple questions. I'll share a little bit about the company and I'll say, do you have any questions about company things? So that makes it more of a back and forth versus feeling like you're being interrogated, honestly.
Yeah.
But it really just depends. I mean, if the manager is open to it and if that's how you feel like it's flowing, then definitely ask them throughout. I feel like that's okay. But if you feel like they're running through a list, there's some people that are they're more structured. They're more of like, I need to do it in this specific order. Then I think saving them for the end. Maybe if you're saving them for the end, prioritize your top 2 or top 3 questions you really, really want them to answer. Because you might run out of time. So you may not get to everything. So what are like your big questions of like, I can't walk away from this conversation if I don't know this. So that's it.
Yeah. And I will add to that, active listening in the interview. I've seen a lot of candidates, like they'll prep their questions before, which I think is great. But really, really listen in the interview. I think some people get really nervous and they kind of, I don't want to say zone out, but it's kind of like just a nervous habit where you have your list of questions, you go through them, and then the hiring manager already answered like 2 of those throughout the interview. So just skip them on your paper if you know they've already answered. But I think it's always best, like, because it just shows active listening skills if you're not asking a question they already went over.
Yeah. As a recruiter, I pre-answer questions that I know that I'm going to get. But I think it's okay to say, well, I had 2 questions about this and this and this, but you already answered them. So I think we're good. Because that still shows that like you were prepared and you had the questions. It's okay to acknowledge like you had questions. It's okay if it already got answered.
And I'll point out that you said for the listeners, 2 to 3 questions, especially with the hiring manager. So if you know the interview is an hour, or if you're not aware of the time, you didn't get it in time on the interview, ask. I have quite a few questions, like how much time do you have for me? But like you said, I think the best route is like pick those top 2 or 3. What would you say if like they went through their top 2 or 3 and the hiring manager wraps it, but they have like 2 or 3 lingering ones that they just really, really want to know too? What's your suggestion for someone who just needs those last few answered?
That's a good one. Ooh, okay. Here's what I would say. I have 2 thoughts when you asked me that. My first thought is if there's other interviews that you're going to have, because, some companies have multiple stages, saving those for another interview, potentially. So it may even be more appropriate to save certain questions for a different interview. So some companies, I know at mine, we do panel interviews where it's more like for colleagues and people that'll be collaborating. So maybe prioritize those leadership type questions that you may have, or maybe like one leadership and one challenge question, or a leadership and a goals question. But if it's more around collaboration, communication, maybe saving that for a later interview. Another suggestion is maybe putting it in your follow-up email, your thank you email that you send out, which I know not everybody does those. Different people have different opinions about follow-ups. But if you want to send a follow-up email, I feel like it's appropriate and okay to drop them at the bottom. That way they can maybe hold it, save it, or maybe they'll respond to you and answer the question.
And are there any questions specifically to show that you're a good fit? I know that's kind of an open-ended question, but any way to portray like your expertise and your knowledge outside the questions you're already asking that you suggested to ask? But is there a way to show that like, hey, I know what I'm talking about through a question, or should that maybe be saved for just answering, if that makes sense?
Ooh, that's a good one. So let's say, for example, like kind of knowing your job function, or if your marketing versus your sales and things of that sort. So maybe having 1 or 2 questions that's a little bit more of like a marketing type specific question, where it's like, okay, what is you all's strategy around your social media, or maybe your drip campaigns? Do you all run those? Or maybe if it's a sales type of role, having a question that's a little bit more around like, what do you all do as far as your pipeline management? How do you all manage your forecasting? Having those job function specific questions, so that way they can see and know that like you speak the same language, right? And that also gives you an opportunity. And I would say, honestly, with a lot of these questions, it gives you an opportunity to kind of chime in a little bit and kind of reassure like, oh, okay, that's really cool. That I'm glad to hear that you all have your forecasting calls like this and you structure it this way. Previously, this is what I've done to prepare for forecasting conversations, or from a marketing perspective. I'm glad to hear that you all have these types of email sequences and this is your strategy for these types of drip campaigns. Previously in my other roles, this is how I've structured it. I've seen successes with doing it this way, whatever it is you want to fluff and add in there. I think that's a really cool way to be able to ask a question where you kind of might already know the answer to it, or you want to kind of get a sense of their strategy and their approach, and you can kind of give a little bit of your sprinkle up in there too.
Ooh, I love that. That's such a good tactic.
Looking at the job posting really probably could help. And again, I'm going to keep using probably sales and marketing for my examples because I hire a lot for sales and marketing. But if you see social media, email, website on there, that that's something that's going to be important for that role. So having a question or two around website, social media, email, something like that. So use the job description to help you.
Yeah. Use a job description. And then the questions that the hiring manager is asking during the interview will show you what's important to them too. So many people bypass that. But a quick stat. So 32% of candidates didn't get hired because they didn't ask good questions. So I thought that was an interesting stat as well. So it's a pretty high percentage too. So questions, and you have that 42% for lack of prep. Now you have your 32% for not asking good questions. So this is a really good show today. I feel like a lot of candidates just don't realize how important prepping and questions are. It seems so simple, but it's such an easy thing to do. And you're just already put at top 5% of candidates, no matter what. I mean, you're already in the interview with the hiring manager. They're already interested in your skill set. Like, just do these extra 2 steps that we've gone over so far to just really, really stand out. It goes so far. Like, just the stats outside of anything today show that difference.
It really does. And honestly, some of these things you don't necessarily have to do every single time. Like, some of these things, if you sit down and you buckle in and you lock in and do it one time, and of course you'll tweak it for like those specific roles or whatever, like if it's one specific job. But some of these things, like, you'll be 75% there if you just sit down for an hour or two, dump it all out, and you're good. It's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it.
It's so worth it. It's so worth it. And we know interviewing, being on that side is not fun. It's stressful. But if you do this, it's going to be so much less stressful. Just do the prep, practice your questions. I always suggest like role play with a friend, a parent, a sibling, like just print a list of questions, give it to them, and then try to answer it and time yourself. I know I'm kind of throwing in my tips now, but I always tell people to time themselves and see how long it took you to answer open-ended questions. So we get it, it happens, but practice, and then you'll just keep getting better at it. So keeping on interview questions to ask and not to ask, what about benefits? That is like super important to people. How many days do they get off? Holiday, insurances. When should they ask that, and who should they ask that to?
That's a good one. So, and I'll focus on benefits and not compensation yet, because my brain went to the full package there for a second. So I would say, generally speaking, a recruiter can give you a little bit around the benefits if you just want to kind of know general, getting a gist of what they offer. Sometimes it's on the website. I know like some people even give like a 1-pager where you can just kind of see through a little bit. So I would say, at the beginning, wanted to just get a general idea, maybe not getting specifically into like, how much is you all's 401k match, but just simply, do you all offer 401k? And I would probably recommend having those conversations probably more with the recruiter. And this is from my perspective, because shockingly, hiring managers probably don't know a whole lot. So as you're progressing a little bit more through the interviewing process, and maybe you've gotten through the hiring manager stage, you're getting a little bit further, maybe a second interview after that or something of that sort, where you feel like you're making some progress, is when I would probably recommend asking a little bit more of those detailed questions that you may have. If there's, somebody, sometimes I know from like a health or medical perspective, like they may have really high medication, so they want to make sure that their medication's covered. Just kind of asking, again, having that check-in conversation with the recruiter. More than likely, they work pretty hand in hand with HR. If they're not already doing some of the HR things too, they'll probably be able to answer that and give you a little bit more context. I probably wouldn't recommend asking the hiring manager, because they're probably going to punt it over to HR. But I would say getting your general questions more high level in that early conversation. And then maybe after you're feeling like you're getting a little bit closer and a little bit further down is when you can ask if there's a couple of like specific things. I probably wouldn't say like wanting a list or play by play of every little thing, maybe. And again, from my perspective, because we haven't quite gotten there yet, but if there's something specific, like if 401k is important to you, the specific type of health insurance, PTO, holidays, whatever is really important, wait until you get a little bit further out.
Sticking on benefits, and then we'll jump into compensation, salary, stuff like that next. I've seen this a lot. Like if, they'd ask you or one of your recruiters on your team, how many weeks of PTO I get. Say you say 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, I currently get 5 weeks. My question is, when should they maybe negotiate that or try to, if they have 5 weeks and they need 5 weeks, should they say that in that moment? When should they start bringing up like if PTO is a requirement or days in the office or schedule, like how soon should they be talking about those things if it's a problem?
Yeah. If it's something that's going to probably be a deal breaker for you, I would say the earlier, the better. And not necessarily that you're speaking about it or presenting it in a way, because you don't necessarily want to come off like, if y'all can't do this for me, then like I'm out. But really kind of positioning it more from a space of curiosity is how I would say. It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting to hear that you all have that. At my current role, I have 5 weeks of PTO. Do you think is there any flexibility typically that you all have in place, or is that something that's pretty set in stone? So that'll give you the answer to your question without necessarily coming across where it's like a non-negotiable, which it might be for you, but really I would recommend positioning it to be coming from a space of curiosity, of more asking questions, of getting clarity. So again, hey, I see that you all have 2 weeks. You've mentioned that. Is there any flexibility with that? This is what I currently have. I really like to utilize it, and even giving a little bit of why, not that you have to spill your whole life out, but it's like, I really value being able to have time with my family and being able to kind of have that good quality work-life balance, with the days in the week or the days in office. Is there any flexibility with that? It's something I'm very much comfortable with, but just want to be able to I'm curious a little bit around what the flexibility is around that. That way I can make sure always saying if things were to continue to progress, and if this lands into an offer, I want to make sure that I've set my expectations correctly. And I can make sure that I'm making those adjustments that I may have to, because it may be going from 2 days in the office to 3 days, where now that's extra childcare. So I want to make sure that I'm taking the steps that I need to be able to accommodate what this may look like for me in the future. So again, really coming from a space of curiosity, asking the questions more of just wanting to learn and figure out more so that you can make the best decision, and adjustments for yourself is what I recommend.
Yeah. Your delivery and how you're asking these questions, how you're answering questions is super important. And if you come across like curious, like you said, you'll get more information. If you add like something personal, like you said, it could actually help you in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Most recently, I had a candidate who was coming from 5 weeks of PTO, and the company I was hiring for was 3 weeks. And it's 3 weeks. Doesn't matter if you're there for 100 years or 1 year, it's 3 weeks. And I was like, oh man, he's not going to be interested. But he was just curious. And then he's like, well, I've worked at this other company for 10 years and I love my 5 weeks because I have a daughter and all these things and whatever. And so I went to my hiring manager. I said, here's the situation. This candidate is great, like perfect, but PTO. And I know you're not flexible on PTO. However, is there anything you can do? Long story short, the hiring manager at the end of the day was like, I'll be flexible with him. We'll do like a flex schedule with him. And he won't have to take PTO. And so now he has a flex schedule where he can still have the time off, get his job done at the end of the day, be able to make it to the soccer game. That's an example of just like that delivery, and like coming from a curious standpoint is like really, really important, because it could actually help you out in the end big time.
It really could. Yeah. And I'm really glad to hear that worked out for that candidate, because I've run into this before too. And even it gives the hiring manager an opportunity to kind of share a little bit about their leadership style, just like the exact example that you shared of like, hey, we're flexible. Just communicate with me. If your concern is X, Y, and Z, if your concern is, maybe you're caring for a loved one, whether it's a family, a parent, or because it's not even necessarily always children that, we have to take into consideration. So if it's like, hey, I've got to take my mom to these doctor's appointments, it's okay. Go take her to the doctor. If I need you, we'll figure it out, whatever the case may be. So it's really just about that communication, because you never know. It may, like you even said, being able to maybe pivot it to where you may not necessarily get the PTO, but here's a signing bonus instead. everybody's happy.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, great. Of course, salary, super important. Everyone's probably waiting for that.
Yes. Yes.
When do you ask about salary and how do you ask that?
Woo.
And this one is a hot topic.
Yes, it is. It is such a hot topic. And I feel like it doesn't really have to be. It really doesn't have to be
It
a big
doesn't,
thing.
yeah.
Now, and again, this is my perspective and what I will say from my shoes. I say have it the earlier the better. And the reason being is you don't want to take your time where you're investing all the way through for days, weeks, months, however long to find out that this is way below what you're looking for. And now everybody's sad. The recruiter is sad because we have to start over. We got excited about someone and you're sad because you've invested this time. So having that conversation with the recruiter, and probably one of the easiest ways to position it or ask the question is, again, coming from a place of curiosity. Because a lot of times as a recruiter, we're going to ask, if it's not on the application, what are your salary expectations? Getting curious, saying to that recruiter maybe something to the effect of, I'm sure that you all have a really strong compensation package that you have for this position. I'm curious to hear, what is it that you all have budgeted for this role? I'm curious to hear, what is the budget allocation for this position? That way you're not pricing yourself in or out. So you may be okay with what that budget may be. It may be ideal for you to be a little bit higher, but you're comfortable with what they have set. Or you might short yourself where you may say a number that's way lower and they're shooting for the moon for you. Okay. Don't short yourself. And sometimes, it depends. Some may not actually tell you what the budget is. So I always recommend a range. That range being like, ideally I would like to be within this to this. I would probably say no more than like 10 to 15,000. Let's not get crazy with like 60,000 dollar ranges. So you can even break it up, having, this is ideally where I would like to be, but I also would be comfortable between here and here. If it's a role where you're not really sure, because different titles can mean different things in different companies and different industries. So even saying like, this is ideal, this is what I'm comfortable with. Does this align with what you all have budgeted for this position? But if you can, get the recruiter to tell you.
Yeah. That's such a strategic way to tell a recruiter if they don't, like you said, tell you the budget, to put it in like, here's what I want, here's what I'm comfortable with, because then the recruiter, whoever, can't be mad if then you go through some interviews and you go back to the recruiter like, hey, after these interviews, I'm going to need to be more in this range. Just so you know, because now I understand the level of responsibilities before we move forward. I just want to know, I don't want to waste anyone's time. Is that even a range that you guys are open to doing? Because I don't want to continue 3 more rounds and then waste their time and mine. And it's tough though for candidates too. It's so tough because there's also backup candidates. So I've had people counter and then I decline the counter. I'm like, I can't believe they, declined $5,000. I'm like, well, we're already $10,000 over budget. There's also other candidates that are much below. And it's not, at the end of the day, it's like not all that money. But a lot of times, if you have top 3 candidates, their skill set's pretty cutthroat if you get lucky enough to have 3 good ones. And then if you're going to be 10, 15 grand more, then, why wouldn't that company go with the second person that's in line? And it's like, so if you counter too high, you could possibly lose that opportunity. So I love the double range.
And I'm real big on transparency. So if what somebody tells me is way outside, I'll be like, this has been great. I'm so glad we can stay connected. Because it's no point in getting anyone's hopes up. And sometimes, honestly, positions change or new things come up. So if it doesn't work, that's okay. Like, don't be afraid to walk away from something that's financially not going to be in your best interest. Again, this is a 2-way experience. You have to make the best choice for you too. So yeah, that's why I like that. I'm comfortable here. Ideally, this is where I would like to be. Because some people are okay with taking a little bit of a pay cut. It's not ideal, but they're okay with it. But ideally, they'd like to get some more.
Yeah. And I will say this on salary too, and let me know if you agree, because I see this a lot where people are really good at interviewing. They do these preps and everything we're talking about, and they like mastered interviewing. Every interview they do, they get the job because they're just a good talker. And I've seen a lot of these people. And so they have talked their salary high, but then they can't keep a job, or they know they're a good talker, and then they get into the role and they can't do anything. So know that if you come in and you lock in that high salary, you fought hard for that salary. And you talked your way in. Be prepared to perform at that salary. I've seen it a lot in the recent grad. Oh, I got this big salary jump. I'm like, you know you're not gonna be able to shut your laptop at 5, right? Like,
Right.
there's no way. You're 22, you're making that. You will be working more than 40 hours a week. They're like, "I'm not gonna do that." And then immediately they're fired in 2 to 3 months. And I
Yeah.
see it so much, especially in that generation, but I don't wanna point them out. It happens to
It
a
it
lot of
does.
people.
It does. Yeah. You got to match the energy. And of course, like it's important to make sure that you're progressing and upskilling yourself too, of
Yeah.
making sure that if you're going for those higher titles and if you're going for that next tax bracket of things, that you are equipping yourself with those skill sets. So maybe taking a refresher course on something. If again, I'm going to go to sales and marketing. If it's like the systems that, like, I know HubSpot is a very common for marketing and sales roles. Get a certification in that to make sure that you can level up for whatever it is that you may have to do. Or if the role is going to be more strategy focused and strategic, make sure that you've got some different things that you've upskilled yourself. LinkedIn has a lot of great resources, and the internet, ChatGPT, whatever.
Right.
So, because for some people, you are making that level up and it may take you a minute to adjust to it. But that preparation, not necessarily preparing for the interview, but even preparing for the role of what you're walking into.
Kind of pause a little bit here because I do want to mention Kiandria offers services on the side. So look her up on LinkedIn, Kiandria Grimes. Anyway, I'll put her link to her LinkedIn in the comment section here, so you can click her. She offers like full services from resume review. She doesn't write the resume, so she'll consult you on your resume and give you tips and stuff from format to what you should put in there, in general, to your job search and to your interview prep. So she offers those services, and you can tell from this show, she knows a lot of what she's talking about. Honestly, you just got a free service today on this show with it. Oh, really? You're kind of prepared? Yeah, but
I've got more nuggets for you. Don't worry, I've got more.
yeah, I was about to say, and it's so, as a recruiter, I can say too, like, it's so tailored to what, like, she can go specific to what job. She does group sessions with interview prep. She also does one-on-one, so she can really tailor it to like the role that you're applying to. So it can be more of that one-on-one consultancy to get you prepared. If you can instill that confidence in the hiring manager and recruiter, you just probably got the job. When I ask candidates, sometimes they'll actually tell me a weakness that is directly related to the job, like a data entry specialist. What's your weakness? Oh, well, I can't type that fast. I'm like, well,
oh no.
Well, now I can't move forward with you.
Lean into your strengths. Lean into what it is that you're really good at and you're excited about, versus trying to do something that is going to be an uphill battle for you just because you think it's going to make you more money. I promise there's money to be made in a lot of spaces. I've seen a couple of people that are like, I want to work here because I need a job. That makes me laugh. Please don't say that in an interview.